interviewers, it's important to be able to articulate the reason pre-interview planning is critical in conducting a sound, legally defensible interview, as well as being able to take that information gained in the pre-interview planning meeting and using that in making informed decisions within the interview. You have to ask yourself, are you engaging in a cognitively, emotionally supportive interaction which enables and motivates the child to convey experiences to the best of their abilities? Having basic demographic information regarding the child, their birth date, their age, their grade in school, learning if they're on task with their peers of the same age. Are there any physical challenges or developmental challenges? And if so, how do they present in this child? Do we need to make any specific accommodations in the interview? Are there any mental health diagnoses? Is the child on medications? And if so, how does that impact the child? All of this information is important in ensuring the child's needs are met while at the CAC. In addition, it's equally important to understand how the disclosure came about, if indeed there was a disclosure. What was the context? What was going on? How did that disclosure recipient respond? Has the child had prior contact with the system? And if so, what was the outcome? And does the child have a supportive caretaker? For example, if a child heard a school presentation and then made a report to the teacher, how did that teacher respond? If a parent was called, what did the parent say or do? If the child considers any of these reactions negatively, then they may be reluctant to report during the forensic interview, which means you may have to spend more time in the pre-substantive phase of the interview. That means your interview just got longer. However, if the information you receive and it says the child feels supportive, they have a supportive caretaker, that caretaker has willingly brought the child to the CAC, then the child may be more likely to engage in the interview process. What we also want to consider that if there is allegations of ongoing maltreatment, then the team needs to consider the possible manipulation and grooming, not only of the child, but the child's family and the community. And if there is manipulation and grooming, your interview just got longer. So as we examine the relationship between a child and the alleged offender, we have to explore this during the forensic interview process because it will help the investigators and others understand a possible delayed or tentative disclosure. So we have to ask, is the child and the alleged offender close? How often do they spend time together? Is the alleged offender someone close to the family? And what's that relationship like? Is the individual a coach or a teacher who sees the child on a regular basis? Or perhaps the person's a relative seen only once or twice a year versus a relative that lives in the same community and sees the child on a frequent basis. What we want to ask ourselves and ask the child then, what are the positives of the relationship? What are the negative? If the child does allege ongoing maltreatment and we are considering possible manipulation and grooming, then there are certain questions that would need to be asked in that particular interview, such as, tell me your thoughts or your feelings when you first met this individual. And did your feelings ever change? And how did they change? And what did your friends or parents say about this person? What do you think about that individual now? Did you ever think about telling? And maybe what kept you from telling? What was going on now that you could talk about it? As we discuss in the pre-interview planning possible reluctance, what that helps us with is It gives us an idea of where to go in the forensic interview. And if everything seems to be going good in the forensic interview, we're getting ready to transition. But let's say the child does not respond to that first transition question, and that is usually, what did you come here to talk about today? Then, based on the information that we've gathered from our team in that pre-interview planning, we can make a decision as to where do we want to go from here. So if you ask, what did you come here to talk about today? And the child's like, I don't know. Then you could follow with, is there something going on that you're worried about? Or, are there some problems happening? And all of these questions are designed to be fairly open. So if the child responds negatively, no, there's nothing going on, there's still room to continue the interview. If we know perhaps the child has reported maltreatment to the school resource officer, then during the pre-interview planning meeting, it could be decided that if the child does not take the transition, that we might bring up that conversation. And again, always keeping that prompt as open as possible. So I might say, I understand you talked with Officer Norton at school yesterday. Now, I'm not talking about the content, what was discussed with the officer, just bringing up that conversation. And you want to provide the information as a declaration. I understand you talked with the officer yesterday, not did you? Because if we say, did you talk to Officer Norton yesterday, the child may just come back and say no. So, dependent on the child's response, prior decisions made by the team in that pre-interview planning, then the interviewer may ask for more information, say some more about that conversation with Officer Norton. The reason for introducing information is acknowledging that there is knowledge of that conversation, but again, we're not bringing up the content of that discussion. And so the goal is, our hope is that the child will take that information, so hey, they know about this conversation, and then expand on what was said. Other considerations in that pre-interview planning meeting is, what is the child's first language? If at all possible, we should be conducting an interview in that child's first language. Memories are laid down by language. So if a child's language is different than English, then their memories are laid down with that particular language. So then we want to maximize the information gained in that interview. And so then we should try to interview that child in their language. And that may mean that we need an interpreter to come in and be there to take our questions and formulate them in a language that is that child's first language. If we do, we're liable to get more information than if this child knows some English, let's try to do the interview in English. We're not going to get near as much information. So always be considering what is that child's first language, what is the language that was used to lay down those memories, then ask, do we need an interpreter? It would be important to know how that child identifies. If they identify as LGBTQ+, and are the parents or caretakers aware of this? How does the child want to be referred to within the interview? It's just being respectful of where that child is and how they're presenting. One of the other considerations for pre-interview planning is outside evidence. So if I introduce the idea of the conversation with a school resource officer, well, that's outside evidence. That's information that I'm introducing. But if I have photographs or video stills or chat logs, all of that needs to be examined during the pre-interview planning meeting, if there is a possibility that that would be introduced within the interview. And then decisions would need to be made If it's images of child sexual abuse material, will they be sanitized? Will they not be sanitized? What order will they be introduced? What would be the purpose of introducing that information? If the purpose is we've got no disclosure and the hope is that, hey, if I show these images, the child will automatically start to disclose, that's not a reason to introduce that information, because oftentimes kids will look at those images and say, wow, that person looks just like me, but it's not me. So we have to think about what's the purpose and what we hope to achieve and what we would do if the child says, no, that's not me. And all of that needs to be done in that pre-interview planning meeting. So pre-interview planning is critical to the success of a forensic interview.